important point from me, and this will come out when you hear from participants, but I'm aware that there has been a lot of discussion and I think a little bit of confusion around closing times, and we've certainly had quite a lot of emails about that. Just to be quite clear, irrespective of what anyone else may have said previously, the guidance is that, or not the guidance, the rules, sorry, are that businesses must stop and have their doors closed and customers off the premises by 10 o'clock. So that, as far as I'm concerned, that is unambiguous. I know there's been some conflicting detail has been out a little bit earlier about that from different times of the day, and yesterday the guidance came out quite late last night and everyone's had a chance to look at it now. So it's doors closed, customers away by 10, if there's, so that to avoid any confusion about that one. Right, we'll now make a start. There's a chat function. I will invite your questions to start using that, although I have got some from you earlier on, so we'll go to those first of all when the time comes. Eugene, thank you so much for joining us. Can we come to you, please, just for a little bit of context and background around the restrictions, please?
Okay. You'll be aware that throughout this year, this is initially, I guess, crept upon us, and we had in the early phase of the pandemic a rapid escalation in terms of numbers of cases admitted to hospital, and subsequently an increase in the number of deaths in the city, which took us really quite a long way above the average for the time of year during the month of April. Since that time, with the previous lockdown, the full lockdown, we've seen a very significant fall. Mortality rates in the city have dropped down so that the death rate per week at the moment is below the average of the last 5 years. So, and in addition to that, the most vulnerable group, the people who are in care homes, where a large proportion of those deaths occurred, have been protected to the degree that we now have, again with the care homes, a rate of deaths which is down to that which preceded the pandemic. Now, in the first few weeks after the alleviation of lockdown, Newcastle did extremely well. We saw the cases drop down so that we were down to very small numbers. At the same time, we increased testing in the city fairly significantly, and at one point we were seeing only 1 case in 200 that were tested coming through as positive. Now that's shifted really markedly in the last 2 weeks. So what we've seen is a rapid escalation in the number of cases that are diagnosed, and you'll all be aware that there are limitations on the number of tests that are available at the moment. Within the tests that are being done, the proportion of cases being identified as positive is now much greater than it was before, and has exceeded now 5%. Now that might not seem a great deal to you, but if we've gone from 1 in 200 now to about 1 in 20 over that period of time. What we know from last time around, the testing that we were doing in the early part of the pandemic was really of people who were being admitted to hospital and who were sick. They tended to be old. They were the people who were really vulnerable to the disease. At the same time as that was happening, we know that there was a circulation of the virus in the community amongst younger people. We weren't picking it up because we weren't testing them. They weren't as sick as the people who were being admitted to hospital, but they were there. Now that we've got broader testing in place, we have more of an early warning of what's going on. The increase that we've seen in the last 2 weeks has principally been in that group. So that it's been in the younger age groups. And about a week ago, something like 60% of all the positive tests that we were seeing in the city were in people aged 18 to 30. That's begun to increase. We've begun to see more cases in older people. At the moment, we're not seeing a large number of admissions to hospital in Newcastle. It's really quite small numbers still, but other places are beginning to see admissions to hospital rising again, and they're beginning to see deaths creep back into COVID deaths creep back into those numbers. Now, the experience of previous epidemics is that if you act early and decisively, there is an opportunity both to reduce the height of the peak of that wave of infections, and also to shorten the duration. So the purpose of what we're doing now is to try and nip things in the bud in order to have the smallest period of the least lockdown that we can in order to keep the city safe. Now, in doing that, we're trying to walk a line between two things. We don't want to end up flip-flopping between total lockdown and, or on the other hand, rapid escalation of the problem with COVID and the sorts of rates of death that we saw in at the end of March and early April. In order to do that, we have to find a midline to walk, and the regulations that have gone in and went in after a request from the 7 local authorities for those to happen are an attempt to try and walk some of that line. I have to say that I know that there's going to be quite a bit of the questioning, the dialogue about this is going to be about early closing times and about the degree of constraint that's placed on business by these things. My understanding is that this was probably the best deal we were going to get. I think if we didn't have this level of restraint in place, my very strong suspicion is that we would have been asked to close down completely back into a more severe lockdown. And the numbers that we're seeing across the area of the 7 authorities tends to bear that out. At the moment, the rates in South Tyneside are going very high indeed, may possibly reach the highest rates in the country fairly soon from the way that those things are heading. We are further behind that, but at the moment we're seeing nearly 70 cases per 100,000 people per week in the city. That's a pretty high rate compared to where we were only a very short while ago. So we need to act now in order to do this, and that's why we've taken these steps. I fear that if we don't see a drop in that, then more severe restrictions could be coming on the tail of it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Do you want to kick off, Adrian, with those?
Eugene, thank you. It's really clear. I think the first one I've got is actually in terms of lifting these restrictions. What is the mechanism for that assessment? And have you any idea? Would you sort of care to talk about timescales for that?
Okay, the regulations that have been put in place will be reviewed formally on the 2nd of October by the Secretary of State. They'll be reviewed on a 2-week cycle at maximum. But actually, we do have the opportunity, if there are other issues to raise, that we can feed in the interim to the regular national gold meetings, which are taking place on a weekly basis. And in fact, earlier this week, in order to implement these regulations, they held an emergency gold meeting. So for significant issues, we could go back on those. In terms of lifting the regulations, our ideal would be to see a fall in those numbers of positive tests. One reservation I have about that is because of the constraint that we know exists on the supply of tests nationally, that we could find ourselves failing to see the true volume of disease activity. So we're looking at other ways, other proxies that we might be able to use to be able to tell what the levels of circulating virus are in the community. And there are some of those we might be able to use, and we'll be arguing the case for those with the Secretary of State subsequently.
There are a couple of questions around handling of family bubbles by particularly restaurateurs with maximum table numbers of 6. And I think between you and Ed Foster, I think it would be very helpful for people to have your take on exactly how, as a business operator, they should be handling this.
I'll give you my view, and then Ed can review. I mean, I think it's quite clear in the regulations that the restriction on mixing households is mandatory for private homes and gardens. It is advisory in public, and my public health advice at the moment would strongly be to discourage people from mixing households in other venues as well. But I think my take on it is that the reason for that is there is a recognition that businesses cannot be totally expected to regulate the behaviors of others. We're asking the public to obey these regulations, and we're asking that they undertake, not to mix households in wherever possible. But I think that it may still happen in venues, and I don't think that the venue owners can necessarily be held responsible for the behaviour of other people in those circumstances. Ed, do you want to comment?
Yeah, that is absolutely my interpretation as well. And I've spoken with the heads of service, regulatory service across the region, and that is the view of everybody in the region, that it applies in a domestic setting, and it's up to the licensees to give guidance, and that's as much as they can do. It's a difficult thing to police, but it's what we want to encourage, but policing it is very, very difficult.
Eugene, I'm conscious time's getting on. We will let you go shortly. We are expecting in excess of 40,000 odd students coming back quite soon. And I know that both the universities have put in place procedures and briefing sessions and protocols for returning students. That industry, I suppose, or those two universities and the college, I think I heard the Vice Chancellors yesterday say that the value of that is about 1.4 billion to the city centre every year. And so I think obviously as a city, we want to try collectively, because it's really important to make sure that students have as good an experience as possible, these restrictions notwithstanding. And I was really just, from what you know, it may be an unfair question, how best can businesses work to support students and give students a good time? We all know what students are going to want to do, which is get out and enjoy themselves. I guess enforcement needs a light touch. Is there anything you can sort of?
I don't know that I have
about that.
I don't know that I have any kind of great and unique ideas about that, other than to say that I think that if we're working with COVID secure environments, and we would expect students to be compliant with those when they're using your venues and so on. And that will be the message that is being put out very clearly through our communications with students, through the agreements we have with the universities about this. The universities have prepared COVID secure plans, which have been with my department this week to be reviewed. They need to be signed off by me. There is a very clear level of escalation of response within universities, and we'll be trying to get students both to be thoroughly compliant with the guidance and to take on the NHS app, which I think will help, particularly in that population, with any track and trace that might be necessary. But it is going to be a problem. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I think that the benefit for the city of having the students, it outweighs the potential risks to them. My big worry about students and about young people generally is the circulation of virus within them that then goes on to affect other people. It's much less of a risk for the age group. And I think we need to get that message of social responsibility over through the universities in order to make that work. But I don't think there's a sort of magic answer for businesses in order to be able to do that. I think we just need to consistently make the point about those behaviours through all of our different avenues.
Eugene, thank you very much. There's one question from Michelle, Michelle Tyndall, which I'm going to leave, Ed, because I think it's one for you. So Eugene, if I can thank you on our behalf, thank you very much indeed. You're welcome to stay, but I know you've got other things to do. So
I can stay for about 10 minutes, and then I need to go on to another meeting after that. So I'll hang around for a little while before going.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Ed, in which case, could we come across to you, please, then on how you see the restrictions impacting on business operations?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Adrian, to you and your team, Tarek and Stephen especially, for organising this webinar. I think that throughout this outbreak, communication and the way that we've worked together to support business in the city has been really, really important. And we did a great job managing throughout the outbreak, the early stages of the pandemic, and then reopening. And there's been some really innovative systems gone in and investment to manage premises. And I'm hoping that we can just manage this next stage of crisis that we're in together. I'm disappointed that people have been misled by some misinformation, and hopefully this afternoon we can sort out and give some clarity on what is meant by these new regulations. We're going to circulate an FAQ sheet which summarises quite clearly what the regulations say. So the regulations can be summarised into 3 bullet points. And the first bullet point is that residents must not socialise with other people outside of their own households or support bubble in private homes and gardens. So that's the first regulation. So the second one is that the hospitality industry, which includes cafes, takeaways, pubs, restaurants and hotels, that they are restricted to people being seated at table and to table service. So that's the second regulation. And then the third regulation, which again applies to takeaways, pubs and restaurants, and cafes, is that there's a late night restriction in terms of opening hours, and that premises will be closed at 10 p.m. To 5 a.m. And then along with that, in the FAQs, you'll see that there's additional guidance that is given, and this is the onus is on the individual to comply with this guidance. And this is the best thing that we can do to prevent the spread of the virus, is that residents should not socialise with other people outside of their own households or in public venues. And then we go on to say that public transport should only be used for essential purposes, such as travelling to work or school. And that holidays should only be taken with people in your own household or support bubble. And then we're advising residents that they shouldn't attend sporting events or venues. So these steps have been put in place, as Professor Milne outlined, to stop the spread of the virus and to try and reduce the transmission rate that we're seeing go through the roof. And for each notification, everybody that's involved in this has a ping come up on the system. And the number of pings that we're seeing come through, my inbox is going all the time, and I'm not actively involved in the day-to-day management, but the number of cases coming through is significant. Our data is showing that increased rate of transmissions in homes, and that people aren't following the guidance on social distancing. We're doing everything that we can to protect vulnerable, and we want to keep the businesses open. We want to keep the city running, but we know that we've got to sort of put in place steps to try and deal with the rapid spread of the virus, and that's why we've seen these guidelines. And it looks as though, from looking at the news, that other areas are going to be have to follow similar guidelines, if not the whole country. So in terms of enforcement, we work very, very closely with Northumbria Police and Steve Wykes' teams. And I'm probably going to steal Steve's thunder here. Our enforcement principles, which we jointly agreed right at the very beginning, are to sort of engage, encourage, and educate, and only as a last resort to enforce. And you know, the new powers, we can issue fixed penalties, but we want to be clear that we want to support business to understand this, and we won't be issuing fixed penalty notices for just pushing people out of the door at 1 second past 10. We want you to ensure that all your customers are sat down. The other thing that has become mandatory is for you to have track and trace in place. But also, we've been circulating this week, and we'll make sure that we push this out through NE1 as well. The NHS, it's going to become a mandatory requirement from the 24th of September to display the NHS test and trace QR code in your premises so that people can log on to that. We think that it's best that you have your own track and trace system in place, as well as using the NHS track and trace system. The NHS track and trace system, if somebody becomes infected, it then helps Public Health England. But in terms of speed, we know this from the work that we've done with you. Your track and trace systems are working. There's some really innovative systems out there. We've worked very closely with quite a lot of you when you've had customers come in, or if you've had staff infected. So please carry on using your own track and trace systems, but please download the QR system code from the NHS as well. This is going to be a mandatory requirement. We want to encourage you to carry on having the groups of 6, and just probably displaying in your premises that it's guidance that that people are best just to socialise in the single households, and if you can keep on that. I know that you've worked very, very closely with our staff, but it's important that people maintain what we've already been doing. We've seen, and we know that the customers breach this. We had one premise this week where a group of 30 went in. They booked 5 tables of 6 and then intermingled in a premise. And then I think that we've had 5 cases linked to that, and then that has taken out the staff that served them. So it's important that we work and have the social distancing in place, and we work with the groups to 6. I want to thank you for the support and the way that when things, if you do have a case in your premises, for the way that you've worked and supported all of my staff, and the way that you've worked with them to quickly turn that around and deal with the incident in a very professional manner. But what we've got to do, we've all got to challenge the behaviour and respect social distancing and try and stop the spread of the virus. And it's even more important as we see the students coming back to the city. We need to be strong in encouraging the public and staff to follow the message of hands, face and space to stop the spread of the virus. Thank you.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to Ed shortly for some questions, but Steve Wykes, I know your bit's pretty brief, so I thought if we listen to you now, and then we can handle questions with the rest of the time available to us.
Okay, thank you, Adrian, and good afternoon, everybody. I will be as brief as I can. I absolutely appreciate this is a really challenging time for businesses in the city, but primarily our role as a police service is to support everybody's compliance with these new regulations, and that includes supporting you as businesses. We've had right from the outset of the pandemic a 4E approach, very well published nationally. Essentially that stands for engage, explain, encourage and then enforce, and it is in that order that we intend to continue to support our efforts, or everybody's efforts, in respect of the escalating conditions and regulations that are imposed upon us. I just want to talk very briefly through how we are set up structurally to respond to this. You will see some slight differences in the policing response. It starts with our frontline. The normal police officers that you would see responding to incidents are being briefed about the legislation and are expected to come out and conduct that 4E approach throughout the community. We have extended that slightly to the nighttime economy teams that operate within the city. We are retaining that resource. Certainly for this weekend, the assets that would normally have been deployed in yellow jackets, as many of you will be used to within the city throughout the nighttime economy, will be coming in a little bit earlier, Friday and Saturday night. We'll be retaining them until necessary to support the dispersal post 10 o'clock. and to support those businesses that maybe need some help in order to get their customers away from the premises. That will be in partnership with Ed's teams. We'll be working collaboratively in the city to support the nighttime economy. Beyond that, we're commanding a force-wide operation within which we have access to some public order assets, and however we best describe them to those that aren't familiar with policing, I suppose, is those who are used to dealing with public order situations or protests, etc. So we have access to some extra resource if we think it's required, but it's not the intention to deploy them unless we need them. We have also created some partnership teams in the sort of Jesmond, Sandyford, Heaton area of the city, because of what we expect we may have to deal with in terms of demand as people do leave the city, and some of our younger residents may be requiring some support and guidance around adherence with regulations. And again, that will be in partnership with staff from the local authority, and the universities are working with us. And actually, that is there is significant funding from the universities to support that operation. And lastly, there is a task force within Newcastle that has been created in collaboration with the local authority that will work during the days in partnership with regulatory bodies in the council to ensure that, again, we have a capability to respond to those instances where things aren't going right. But it is important to say that all of that policing response will be conducted in a proportionate way. We've tried incredibly hard to deliver a proportionate policing response to this. It is right and fair to say that now feels like a time when, in this particular area of the country, we need to step it up a little bit to make sure that compliance is present. And so whilst the 4E approach will absolutely remain, and as Ed points out, we're not going to be jumping down and getting excited if there are customers not quite out the door at 10:01. That's not the way we'll be interpreting this. But if we see persistent breaches of guidance, we will be moving to the enforcement options that are available to us, and you will see that throughout the force area, not just in Newcastle. Just on enforcement, last comment from me, Adrian. I just want to try and explain that essentially our enforcement approach will be that we want to take this legislation and these regulations in the spirit in which they are intended. So whilst we can get hung up on detail and the nuances and exceptions, etc., fundamentally our staff are being briefed that this is about reducing poorly managed social interactions. Now, where they're well managed in licensed premises, great, we will be supportive of that. And if individuals are misbehaving or being non-compliant, it's absolutely on them. It's clear from the legal restrictions that are in place around residents not socialising outside of their own households in private homes and gardens. This is about that poorly managed, non-socially distanced interactions between people. And we will be enforcing in the spirit of that. So where you need help, where you need guidance, please ask. We will be, as I say, following that 4E approach as we have done right from the outset. Thank you, Ed.
Steve, thanks very much indeed. We will get to your questions now, and I'm going to pick up from some of the ones we've been asked earlier, and the ones that you're kindly beginning to put up onto the chat. Those of you that want to use the chat, can I ask you to think carefully about what you're typing so that you keep it succinct? Otherwise, what I'm looking at disappears off the top of the screen, and I very quickly lose my way. Ed, one of detail which will affect a number of businesses in the city, and this is from someone who operates a counter service. So people typically would queue up, order what they want, and then either take it away or go and find space at a table. Do you think they need to do things differently, or can they continue to operate on that basis?
This is quite clearly described in the regulations. It has to be table service. You can't offer counter service. It's to stop that social interaction of people and people gathering, and that's why it's moved to table service.
Okay. There are a number of questions from the hotels. And I might just try and put 2 or 3 of those in together. So there are 2 or 3 that pertain to hotel guests at bars, and basically what needs to happen there. Presumably the bar must close, but do then people need to return to their rooms, or are they able to stay in a sort of lobby type area?
I think that with this, the law is silent, but the bar area should be closed, and those. I think that it's probably equivalent. Non-hotel guests should leave, but guests of the hotel. I think that ideally they would move into so that there's no social intermingling, but I guess that a hotel becomes the equivalent of a domestic setting almost. So providing you have that social separation, you can't send, it doesn't say you have to send people to bed at 10, but we would encourage that there should be, the layout should be good so that there isn't that social interaction between different groups. For instance, stag and hen parties, that definitely wouldn't be encouraged. But if you had a family group sat together, then yeah, it's managing it and managing what we're trying to achieve by the regulations.
Thank you. I think staying with hotels. Hotels offering daytime business conference facilities. The questioner thinks they are, or they were exempt from the rule of 6 if it was for business or training purposes. Has that changed?
The national legislation would still. I think in terms of it talks about the service of food and beverages. So I think that we would probably defer to the national legislation. I will discuss that one with the lawyers, because I think that we'll give a written response to that question.
Okay, Ed, thank you. I can kind of see in the, as we all are using Zoom. So I think if a hotel has got people who want to come and use a conference room, that'll be, they'll be quite pleased about it. But there's probably not quite as much of that going on now as perhaps there might have been in the past. There's a question about halls of residence. And do students living in halls, you might not know this, in which case we'll have to go back to the universities, but we'll answer it anyway, we'll try and answer it. Do students living in halls count as a household?
Definitely not. The other aspect that many people don't know, that my teams also cover housing regulation, and the halls of residence, you couldn't have, for instance, Newcastle University, all of leases, that is not one household. They're divided into what we call pods, groups of 6. So you have 6 rooms that share a kitchen and living room. That is one household. You can't have the whole of the building, and that in housing legislation, that is quite clearly defined.
Okay, thank you. There's a question, I think I know what the answer to this is, but I'm going to read it out anyway, and it's about grace periods. I think everyone has been extremely clear, but let's just repeat it. Will there be any further consideration given to a grace period for restaurant operators? It takes far longer for customers to finish up a meal than it does just drinks. Therefore, in real terms, this means we are closed to new customers from around 8 to 8:30.
The law, it's 10 o'clock closing. I think that this is going to cause a cultural shift. It maybe will move things to times gone by, and people will come out earlier, because we know full well that the culture in the city now is for people not to come out until 11 o'clock. But I think we'll just see that shift, and I think that we need to sort of probably wind the clock back in terms of years, and just fit in with the requirement. The requirement is that the doors are closed by 10 o'clock at night. We can't start misinterpreting that. We have to be fair to everyone, and that's the way that the law has been drafted by government.
Okay. There are some there are some detailed questions. Again, it's sticking with hotels again. I'm going to try and put two together. So there's one from Linda Coley, which says, are hotels allowed to offer a mixture of table service alongside collection point for breakfast with social distancing in place? And we also had a question, which is, can we still operate socially distanced cold breakfast bar with wrapped food items with a coffee machine, wipes and sanitizer all available? The area is manned to control social distancing. So I think this is hotels wanting to know how must they, and I think you've already said they must, or businesses must, do a table service for breakfast, or is there any way in which hotel guests go and get their own breakfast from a breakfast bar?
Yeah, I don't think they can use a breakfast bar, but what a lot of hotels have been doing, they've been doing a sort of takeout service where you collect your breakfast bag, and I think having that mixture of takeaway in that format and table service, it is possible. To carry on with that, but at the breakfast bar, I've been to many hotel breakfast bars with my two sons, and the congregation that goes on there, and the social mixing and the touching of items. I know that there's probably COVID secure arrangements, but yeah, it's table service. And I think that adapting a form of takeaway for guests, I think that is what is implied by the regulations.
I think, and Ed, thank you. I know also for the hoteliers that are listening to this, that your environmental health colleagues actually if would be more than happy to give any additional guidance around that. So hoteliers, please feel free to get in touch either through us or through Ed and his team directly, please. There's a question about, can you confirm that no changes have been made to the rules in regards to hosting wedding receptions of up to 30 guests and off-site work meetings where social distancing is maintained? I think we've already done the sort of the conference one, but what about the weddings?
Yeah, there's no change to the guidance on weddings and funerals. That remains the same.
Okay. This is another student question. Are the council and police happy with ticketed student events to take place on licensed premises, providing they tick all the boxes in terms of track and trace, table service, maximum groups of 6, social distancing? So are the council and police happy with ticketed student events taking place on licensed premises, providing they comply with track and trace and obviously have table service? They wouldn't have anything else.
I think that the concern here is that is, it's just like a booking system with any other guest. So we're perfectly happy for groups of students to be booked in groups of 6. But what we are concerned about is that sort of what we've seen with previous Freshers Weeks, and what we've worked on with the promoters is having the pub crawls. So I think that the promoters, what they need to do is think about an organised way that they can move students into these booking slots without having the students moving around town as a mass group, because that does give us concern. So it's that movement of people aspect and how they manage that is concern. I think the venues and the measures that the venues have put in place in terms of social distancing and the, working with the groups of 6 is absolutely fine, but it's the movement of people around the city. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in, is because of that interactions that go on, and after the venues have closed as well, that social distancing isn't respected. So we've got to think through what that looks like. It's going to be very different this year. It needs to be progressive rather than having a group of 100, 200 students swarming on a premise. And I know that we've done really well in managing that in the last couple of years because of what has gone on in the city. But we've just got to think again in terms of how we get those students to move around. Steve probably would like to come in there as well.
Just very briefly, if we're planning events like that, we will want to see detailed risk assessments, and we'll want to be part of the discussions in respect of them. And I would just urge you as event organisers to consider your obligations beyond the end of that event. So let's not, for example, bring people in as early as possible to maximise the sales up until 10 p.m. so that we then have big issues afterwards. But I'll leave that there beyond saying we will want to review risk assessments and do that in consultation with you.
Okay, thank you.
Adrian, if people want to pre-notify us of those events, and we can try and work with any promoters and venues with Steve.
I think that's Ed. I think that's, and Steve. I think thank you very much. I think it's a really, really important point, that, and we will sort of make that offer to the universities after this. There's a good question from Ollie around track and trace and the NHS system, Ed, that you mentioned. If we keep our own track and trace and also have the NHS QR code, are customers required to register twice?
We would prefer them to register twice because the information that comes back from Ollie's own system will come back to us really, really quickly in being able to respond to any incident. The other thing that we're really keen that you do is somehow, if we can have the table where they're sat, because with the case that I gave the example of where you had the group of 30 go in, the venue had no clue of where they sat in the premise. And so it was difficult working out the contacts. So we would really encourage you to do both, because we can't guarantee that people have got the track and trace app on the phone. You can have a QR code, but how do we know that they've got the app on the phone?
Okay. We've had there's another question about, is it last orders at 10 o'clock, or do we have to have customers out of the door by 10? I think I'm going to answer that one because we've had it a number of times. It's customers out of the door, doors closed by 10, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. There's Steve, a question from Sarah Smith. You said if there was a persistent breach of guidance, officers would enforce. Is that correct, or would you only enforce if breach of regulations? That might be a bit unfair for a sort of open forum one. But
no, she's quite. I think I've maybe just misspoken. We can only enforce breaches of the regulations, so the legislation. If I've said we'll be enforcing guidance, I apologise. We won't be. That isn't the point.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Right, Dale Potter said, please may we be sent a copy of the legislative order prior to it being enacted to allow businesses to prepare properly. I mean, in terms of the legislative order, I've seen a copy of a statutory instrument, which actually I wouldn't wish on anyone, having read it. But that is the legal, the baseline legal, isn't it? And then you, Ed, have prepared an extremely helpful what you must do sheet that is accompanying the included in your frequently asked questions. So who's asked that? And that's Dale Potter. We'll get that sent out to you, Dale, if you haven't seen it already. So I think this is from Michael Anderson. Michael, forgive me, I'm not quite sure what nature of business you operate, but we will read it, see if we can discern that. So does this mean you can't offer a takeaway service as people need to queue, as we are unable to offer table service? Does this mean we should close? I mean, my take on that, I mean, we have been told that it is table service only, or if it's a takeaway, then people need to queue in a socially distanced way. But I don't think there's any middle ground, is there, Ed?
Well, you need, if you set up for takeaway, then you need to sort of deal with that and have your risk assessment. So you, I think that the takeaways can do deliveries only after after 10 o'clock at night. But what we're trying to stop is the social distancing and making sure that your premises is COVID secure, and customers should in a restaurant or cafe or pub situation be sat at table. And if they want to come up with different options for delivery for takeaway customers, then there is the option to do that through Just Eat or Deliveroo. But whatever system you've got to keep your premises COVID secure, and you've got to ensure proper social distancing. And what we've seen is the majority of premises that we deal with, you've got good measures in place. It's very, very few people that haven't got those measures, and I think that there's good understanding that we can't have people people where you have groups coming together and that interaction, that's where you risk the spread of the virus, and that's what we're trying to stop.
There are a couple of others on a similar takeaway theme, Ed. So one, can restaurants operate deliveries after 10 p.m? And another from Sarah Shanley is, we currently have our cafe open for takeout with no indoor seating, only external seating. Can we still offer takeaway?
Yes, you can still offer takeaway, but the tables outside will have to be by people will have to be served there.
Yeah.
And deliveries are possible. Yes, they are. You can do deliveries after 10 o'clock for the restaurants and for those that have a food offering, so they can go on to Just Eat and do deliveries, providing that they've got the license for doing that after 11 o'clock at night.
Ed, I think also my understanding of the guidance just around takeaways in particular is that takeaways operate as normal up to 10 o'clock. If they wish to continue trading after 10 o'clock, then they can do delivery only, but they're not allowed to have people sort of queuing up, customers queuing up outside the door. It's got to be Deliveroo or some other way of getting food to customers, hasn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. The takeaways have to close as well. And it's been part of the issues that we've seen late nights has been around the takeaways and people gathering at the takeaways. So they have to close at 10 o'clock, the same as the wet trade.
Okay, from Deborah Duggar, are weddings of 30 still allowed?
Yes, I think we've covered that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, there have been one or two questions about this around dispersal of large numbers of people from the town all at the same time. Do you anticipate, with everyone leaving premises at 10 o'clock, that this might be problematic?
No more than we would normally deal with on a weekend when they're leaving premises in the early hours. So we are retaining resource in the city to support that. We've got very, very well rehearsed plans and capable staff to deal with dispersal from the city. So I don't foresee that being a significant issue.
Public transport at 10 o'clock.
And actually, yeah, sorry, our pictures in the room, socially distanced, of course, just pointing out that actually there's more access to public transport at that time of night. We will be resourcing that element of the operation to ensure that as crowds move from licensed premises into the city, into transport networks and then home, that the legislation is complied with at all of those stages. But again, it will be using that 4E approach. So it'll be a very engaging and sort of encouraging approach from the staff where we see slippage in the compliance.
Thank you, Steve. Right, a question from Rebecca Blacketh. Do we have to get details of every guest who enters our premises, or can we still get one person's detail from each party table?
The rules haven't changed. It's still just the one lead person in the group. Yeah.
Okay. From the Crown Plaza, is self-service coffee machine for private meetings allowed?
I think we would discourage that bit from just thinking about contamination. If it's one bubble of 6, then that would be okay. But if that's open to a wider group, then I think that you've got potential for spread of infection there.
Okay. There's another hotel question, Ed, around room service. So can hotels do room service after 10 o'clock?
Yes, absolutely. There's no issue with that.
Thank you. And a question from Deborah. How do we know people live at the same household, or is it down to trust of the visitor?
I think that this is impossible. I think that, Deborah, what you've got to do is just have give the guidance, and it's up to individuals whether they can do that. You can't. It's impossible for you being sure that everybody is from the same household or bubble, but all you can do is draw the attention to the guidance, and you've done your bit. Then it's up to individuals to follow the recommendations.
Right, I think we're going to have, I know I probably haven't managed to answer or read out every single question, but I hope across this we have effectively managed to answer everything. There's probably, I think we will just do 2 more. Inga's question from the gate, can a live band from 3 separate households, so presumably that's a group with people from, you know, where the band members come from different places, play in a venue?
I think if they can stand apart, can't they? They can socially distance in a band. So yes, I think that would be permitted, but with social distancing in place.
You need a big stage, Inga. I'm sure you can manage that. Right, and then there's a question from the botanist in regards to table bookings. Where do businesses stand in tracking who is at the same household or bubble? I think, Ed, you've probably already answered this. Do we need to get verbal confirmation from the guest, as this is impossible to regulate, or are we relying on guests themselves to follow government recommendations? I mean, I think you've told us very clearly that it's one sort of lead table person, isn't it, who has to get involved in that, who has to enter the track and trace details. Yeah. And after that, you've been very clear that the advice is that households don't mix.
Yeah, I think that all they can do is draw their attention to the guidance, and then we've had conversations and with a number of people in retail and the hospitality sector, and we know the abuse that you've had in challenging that. It's up to individuals to manage their health and respect others, and that's the challenge that we're throwing out to everyone, is protect each other by following the guidance.
Okay. Listen, Chris Lyle has asked if we could answer his earlier question. So, Chris, sorry if I missed that out. I've just managed to find it again. So, and we will make this our last question. We have changed our breakfast format because of COVID for hotel guests to a counter service for continental items using a managed queuing distancing system, and then hot food served at the table. This is not something we can change back overnight. Can you give advice? So are they doing the right thing? Do they need to change it? Or indeed, do we need to get someone out there to have a look, Ed?
I think we're best sort of have a conversation offline, and I'll get one of my environmental health officers in the food team to look at that. I think there's a lot of detail there, and commenting in a scenario like this, it's not easy. It's 20 years since I inspected a food premise. I know that we're dealing with the COVID regs here, but I think that needs looking at in detail. And the team are always there. They've been working extraordinary hours to try and support you. And I know that we're always there day or night, and that myself and the team will answer any queries that you've got. And I know that many of you have got our mobile numbers, Jonathan and Dave Elrington and the commercial team. So we're there to give you any help and support we can.
Brilliant. Well, listen, Chris Lyle, if you would like to get in touch with us, we'll put you in direct touch with Ed and his team. And I think there's one good question has come in, Steve, for you, which I'm going to make that the last one, okay? And it's all to do with buskers. So are you going to move buskers on as this causes people to congregate? If they're playing rubbish music, yes, please.
Yeah, and to be fair, I've been enjoying people asking Ed the difficult questions. I thought I was going to get away with it. Yeah, frankly, if that, this is me taking a view now. But if that busker is causing a crowd to gather that is non-socially distant, then yes. We have bylaws available to us to support interventions with buskers in the city, but fundamentally it also comes down to the individuals gathering. And the responsibility for me sits squarely with them. So if we see people breaching breaching regulations by gathering in a large crowd like that, we'll be speaking to everyone, not just the busker. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Steve. And I think for anyone else worried about that as well, Steve and his team won't unless they're there, they won't automatically know that a crowd is gathering. So if you do see a crowd gathering, please let our NE1 street rangers know, and they can make the necessary report and get that dealt with. Right, we're there.
Adrian, as well, we've moved, we've had active patrols in the city centre over the last couple of weekends, and there's some specific offences, so we've been dealing with that, and there has been a couple of prosecutions over the last year of persistent buskers, so it's an issue. I know that NE1 it's one of your favourites, buskers in the city centre and the quality, but yeah, we have been taking action on them as well.
Brilliant. Okay, well look, first of all to our panel, to Eugene, if you could thank him afterwards on our behalf, Ed. Really appreciate how busy everyone is, both to you and Steve. I hope for everyone else that has been an illuminating and informative session where we've learned more about the background as to the whys and wherefores. We know about what the procedure is now for review, and we've been into an awful lot of detail about the do's and don'ts. There will obviously be some time to absorb all of this, but these rules are in force with effect last night, and I know a lot of you will be looking to the weekend to sort of see how actually it's going to affect things, and certainly people I've been speaking to today, you've already had a lot of people cancelling. Do please keep in touch with us though, so we can monitor this and feed back to the council, who can then feed this back into the 7 combined authorities. But we're all aware of actually what the sort of on the ground impact of these measures are. Right, so I think it just leaves me then to thank our panelists. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time and the clarity of your answers. Thank you everybody else for getting involved. Please don't hesitate to let us have any further questions. We'll pass them on for you. Okay, have a good weekend, everyone. Thanks very much.